First of all, thanks for coming. I really appreciate making the effort to be here today. All my heritage is Irish. My grandparents were Irish. My cousins were all Irish as well. So I was brought up in Australia. And art. I've been lucky because for 30 years, more than 30 years, my full-time job has been making art. I was a labourer, I was a kitchen hand, I was all those kind of things to try and keep me going. But then I just committed fully to the fact that I wasn't going to do anything else but this. And a lot of my friends, when I was younger, started getting married, having children, but there was always a voice inside of me that just said, this is not the life for you. So I just didn't go there. And instead, my practice became my partner. It took a long time because in Australia, there's a whole mental thing around saying that you're an artist, because in Europe, it's much easier, but not in Australia. And I made this commitment to myself that I wasn't going to say I was an artist until it was my full-time job. So people said, what did I do? And I was working in the kitchen. I'd say I'm a kitchen hand. I'd say I'm a labourer, or a tree lopper, or whatever I was at that time to keep me going. One day I got to the point where my full-time job was being a creative and making art. And the first time I ever said to someone, what do you do? And I said, I'm an artist. I can't say I'm a tree lopper or a kitchen hand because I don't do that anymore. I just do this. So that was the beginning of a whole different headspace, because once I started saying that, I was never going to go back to saying I'm a kitchen hand again. So it was an internal commitment that manifested as an outwardly reality, So I've been very lucky to have that lifestyle, which it's taken me all over the world. I've had shows in Europe and had a studio in New York. And I've got to create many amazing projects because for me, it was never satisfactory just to make paintings or drawings. I wanted to do theatrical stuff. I wanted to write my own productions. And I worked in art direction for a while on a part-time basis, where I got to design sets and visuals and the whole clips for Killing Heidi and Something for Kate and lots of bands, Tex Perkins and You Am I. And that gave me great knowledge about how to produce and manifest my own productions. I also designed about 12 plays, including one in London and in Adelaide Festival, and all that stuff fed back into my practice, and my practice fed into that. So it's just become this round thing, and lots of school projects and installations, and so many of them. And all of those gave me more knowledge in how to produce things on a bigger scale, how to engineer things on a bigger scale, and design things on a bigger scale. So it's all great breeding ground, and it came from just saying yes all the time. Even though I hadn't done a lot of stuff before, the first time I was offered to be the art director on a video clip it was after my second clip, and it was my first time I came in as an assistant for Super Jesus, if anyone remembers that band. And then the next time, Something for Kate clip, and they said, do you want to be the art director, designer? I said, sure, okay, why not? Not knowing that I was throwing myself into the deep end fully, but just thinking I'll just find a way to do it and pull it off. And I've always been like that, because it takes risk to move forward. My philosophy for what I've learned, if you wait around waiting for something to change, nothing will change. You've got to move into empty space. You've got to let go of something, move into empty space for something to greet you in that space. And when it does, you've got to say yes. That's the philosophy that I've kind of taken on for my whole life.
Would you recall several highlights early on in your career that sort of figured your acknowledgement of who you wanted to be and where you wanted to go?
One certainly was the opportunity. I got to do my first solo show overseas in Hong Kong. And of course, I said yes to that. And putting that together, going over to Hong Kong, the gallery put me up. I stayed in the gallery for a couple of weeks. And that was the first introduction to going, you know what? I can have shows overseas. It's doable, And so post that, there's been so many shows overseas. I've been able to have solo shows like in Prague, Barcelona, Bern, Zurich, Dublin, London, so many places. I couldn't even name them off the top of my head. And opportunity comes with opportunity. It's amazing. It's just an energetical manifestation process. It's, you just I just keep opening myself up to possibility. A possibility keeps arriving on the doorstep, and I keep going, yes, yes, yes. And in many ways, on some sort of practical level, it's probably cost me my health. But I was born obsessive compulsive, and that's just the way it is. I just cannot stop trying to produce things, even if my body's giving up on me. I still have all these ideas in my head that I want to manifest. The second thing that really changed my life was the Affordable Art Fair came to Melbourne from New York. And I thought, I need to put myself in an open marketplace to see if I have something that people resonate with. So I contacted them and said, I've got a gallery and a studio, and you need to have a gallery to get into the art fair at that time. And I knew they were going to come and check out what I had. I just had a studio complex with a whole lot of bohemians working out of it. And they did. So I saved the money. I paid off the debt. It was like $4,000 at the time. And I had my own stand at the Affordable Art Fair the first time I came to Melbourne. It was a big deal, at that time, especially spending $4,000. I had friends who were very supportive and really good at selling my work. They come in and worked the booth with me. And that changed my life because in 4 days, I turned over $35,000 and I sold to major collectors, came in saying, this guy's the dude. One of them's become like my second father, Paul Guest, High Court judge, amazing art patron. The Bendigo Art Prize he funds that prize, and he's just donated his whole collection to the Bendigo Art Gallery when he dies, and he's getting old now. And of course, I've got multiple pieces in his collection now, but he came into my space at that first art fair, and I didn't know who he was, and he was looking at my work with his partner, really discerningly these particular pictures. And this woman came up to me and said, do you know who that is? I said, no. And she goes, that's the Silver Fox. And I'm like, who's the Silver Fox? He goes, that guy's a high-ranking QC magistrate, major art patron, major art collector. And I said, oh, wow. And he comes up to me and he's really tall. He's an Olympic rower, gold medalist, world champion rower, an amazing person. And he says, I've been walking around this fair for 2 hours and these are the 3 best pieces in the fair. And he goes, I want all of them, but I don't know if I can fit them on my wall. So I'll call you in an hour and tell you if I can take 2 or 3. If I can take only 2, I'll have those 2. So an hour later, religiously, he rang and said, can't only fit 2 on the wall, so I'll take those 2. So he invited me over to his house to see them hung about 2 weeks later. So I went over there and his house is mind-blowing. His collection of art, he lends pieces to the NGV. He's got my 2 hung next to a Brett Whiteley on one side and a John Olsen on the other side, and my 2 in the middle. And I'm like, you got to be joking. I'm just going, that's an Olsen. That's a Whiteley. And he's going, yeah, I'm going to sell those 2. I don't like them anymore. And it was just a real trip for me to have that experience with him. And he's gone on to become one of my dear friends, very much so. And yes, that was an amazing experience. And that first art fair catapulted me into a full-time job. Because there's a lot of hype around me at that art fair, other galleries approached me and said, we want to show you Queensland, we want to show you in Perth, we want to show you in Sydney. So I ended up with galleries all around Australia very quickly and started having contracts to do shows in all these places. So at that point, I went on to doing 6 to 7 solo shows a year for many years, including doing solo shows at Sydney Art Fair, Brisbane Art Fair, Melbourne Art Fair. So it became a massive enterprise in between flying back and forth to Europe and mounting shows over there as well. So everything kind of went to number 11 very quickly.
Do you recall any early experiences, low experiences, which made you question the path that you were taking?
In many ups and downs, of course. And, I often will think what I'm doing is a load of shit, like most people that make stuff. It's a load of crap. What am I doing this for? But then you go, well, I've never been motivated by money. I don't make art, never made art to make money. Because the money idea for me gets in the way. As soon as I think I want to make something to sell, I start making something to sell. And I've never made stuff to sell. I just make what wants to be made and I just make it. And if people resonate with it, great. If they don't, they don't, because I can't make anything else but what is coming through me. And the advantage of being full-time for 30 years is you make a lot of work. Most of my close friends have never seen not even 20% of what I've made, because it goes overseas, goes into state, doesn't come back. Because to make a living off art, you've got to produce a lot, but you've got to sell a lot, because you lose 50% to the dealer. And because my work is expensive to produce of all the materials, you lose 10% in the production as well. And I remember once I was flying interstate, I had a show in Sydney. I picked up the Aeroplane magazine, and there was an article in there, an artist called David Laity. I don't know if anyone here knows that artist. He was quite renowned. And in the article, he says, the difference between my life now and what it was before is before I could make 10 really good paintings a year. Now I have to make 50. And I read that, and I never forgot that, because that's the way it is. I can't make what my cousin would call pot boilers. I've got to keep making stuff that, whether you like it or not, it's at a certain level of quality, because when you're putting into multiple galleries overseas in Australia, it's got to all be at a certain level. And if I made stuff I wasn't happy with, I'd slash it in my studio. I'd cut out the bits that I liked and I'd put them into the next painting. If that didn't work, I'd slash that. So it's always about producing something that I felt I could let go. I could let it go out the studio door and feel that I was proud of it. I'd done the best I could with that picture. And that was always the motivation. And sometimes people come to the studio and go, I love that. Would you sell it to me? And I go, no, because I don't love it. And I can't sell it to you if I don't love it.
Spirituality is a major part of your life, both inside and outside of art. When did it first enter, and how did it manage to become a driving force?
In the show, those who've seen the show, there's a series of drawings there from 30 years ago. At that time, I left Australia to travel overseas to wander. I was a bit lost, and I started to examine how I was brought up, what happened to my childhood. And I won a TV show, and I won a $10,000 trip to Africa. And $10,000 trip to Africa 30 years ago was like a $30,000 trip. My brother had just passed away, and I asked my father to come with me as a bonding exercise to help him deal with the loss of his son. So I went on this 5-star safari to Africa, and I wasn't going to come home for a while, and I knew that. So I backpacked around Africa for about 10 months, and then I went to Europe and all over the world. I didn't come home for over 2 years. And in that time, I read a lot of philosophy books, a lot of psychology books, and the drawings in that early series were never really meant to be exhibited. They were just me lost in making these images that were just coming through me. And that was the first time I really realized that I don't actually make anything, So it's pretty much impossible for my ego to get caught up in what I do, because I don't make it. I don't take responsibility for its production. I just do what wants to come out, and it doesn't belong to me. And often when people are different, there's been so many amazing experiences I've had from people that my work really resonates with them. And the painting or the image belongs to them. It doesn't belong to me. And when people say, well, what does this painting mean? I go, I'm thinking I don't know what it means. But I say to them, what does it mean to you? And they come up with a whole story. And I say, well, that's exactly what it means. Because it's your story. It's your perception. And it's not my painting. So I guess I realized then that I'm just a vessel for what comes through me. And everybody is. I'm not saying no, only one. I'm certainly not. Every human being is. But you either acknowledge it or you don't. But I've certainly found that that's the way it is. And even when I walk around my own show that's in that gallery now, I look at stuff in there and I don't know where it came from. And I look at it like I'm looking at it for the first time because it's not mine, if that makes any sense to anybody.
Early on in your career, you were an actor, and theatre and that form of art was a big part of your life, and you were on the up and up. Why and what changed your direction to become a visual artist in the painting field?
I pursued acting, and I acted in a lot of plays, and I actually worked for the Straight Opera Company as an actor for 6 months, and that was an amazing experience to be on stage at the Art Centre with some of the best opera singers in the world, killing them or stabbing them or doing something with them. And I did a lot of plays. I played, Marlon Brando's part in Streetcar Named Desire. It's a very successful production. I found it really difficult to go and do those kind of productions because I had to connect so deeply with emotion. You can't play Stanley Kowalski and pretend. You've got to be totally consumed by the feeling you get from the script. And when you work with Tennessee Williams' writing, it's just like, oh my God, amazing writing. So I don't know how many plays I acted. It was quite a lot, and some of them were very successful. I did a lot of big kids productions that were really successful. But I always felt like it wasn't. I even wrote my own plays and put them on and produced them and designed them and directed them and acted them as well. But it just felt like something I'm quite shy. People think I'm an extrovert, but I'm not an extrovert. I have a flamboyant element to me, but I'm not really wanting to be the center of attention. And I used to find I got a lot of anxiety before I went on stage to have to reveal myself to such a big audience in such a personal way, because I couldn't see a way around not going straight to the heart when you're performing, because you're going to give the audience part of yourself. Otherwise, there's no equal relationship between the audience and the performer. So when I went overseas, I became very introverted and all I did was draw. And all those pictures in that early series all come from me backpacking around. Some of those were drawn by candlelight in a hut in Lake Malawi, trying to see in the dark. I never thought they'd ever be exhibited. I never thought they'd survive the trip. And my sister, who's here tonight, was instrumental because I sent them home in tubes and she got photographed and they come to RMIT. Yeah, so I'm grateful to my sister for that.
Who are your biggest influences, or who were your biggest influences early on, and do they still exist?
When I went to art school, I went as a Metro Road student and I fell in love with art history because I was so into philosophy. The philosophies of some of the great artists were mind-blowing to me. One of the pieces that influenced me the most, which no one would ever imagine, was a sculptural piece by a guy called Robert Morris. You probably know him, Beck. Yeah, he did this piece where he got a cube, a big cube. He put mirrored glass on all sides of it and put it into a gallery. I think it was in New York. I saw the piece. I walked around the cube. And the philosophy was, people would walk around and I'd hear them, they go, this is really boring. Like, this is dull. What is this? This is an art piece. But I saw what he was doing. He was saying, the piece is not boring. The piece is mirroring back at you, your own perception, and you're getting bored. The piece is showing you that experience that you're having. So don't project it onto the piece, because the piece is not boring. It's exhibiting your attention span and your ability to stay with the piece and how long you can do that for. That piece really influenced me because then I really realized that all art is a mirror. That whenever someone looks at, say, one of my works or Picasso or Dali, it doesn't matter who it is, all they see is a reflection of themselves. They don't know or see the artist behind it. You can't. Because everyone has subjective interpretation of everything in their life. Everyone brands everything in their life something. This is hot, this is cold, this is shit, this is good, that person's ugly, this person's not. But all those are just tags that we give to things. They're not real, And art is great in that way because it's just a great mirror. Someone walks around going, this is a piece of crap. It's not a piece of crap, it's their perception of it that makes it a piece of crap. They brand it as that. And so for me, that was really interesting because I saw that all art is just a mirror. So all I am doing is creating mirrors, like every artist does, But I'm more aware of it. And that's helped me kind of get to the point of going, well, it's not mine anyway. And it's just a mirror that I put into the world. And it's like a ripple effect when you throw a stone to a pond. It creates a ripple and you don't know where that ripple is going to end up. It goes on for an infinity. When someone sees a piece of art or has an experience of any kind of way, that affects who they are and who they see themselves to be. And that ripple goes on for an infinity, And that's the amazing thing about music, art, theatre, and life, because all life is a creative process. When I hear people say, my creative time is my 1 hour I do of life drawing every week, if I get the opportunity to say that, no, it's not. When you get up in the morning, how you dress, what you make for breakfast, that's all a creative process. Where you take someone for a date, what you say to your friend tomorrow, everything's a creative process. What you say to your child, everything's a creative process. It doesn't begin or end with art. Art's just a direct representation of the creative process. But life is creative every minute of the day, and you can be creative in every minute of the day if you want to. It's just a choice and awareness that you are being creative every minute of the day.
How important were family and friends? What have they been throughout your career?
My sister, like I said before, instrumental in helping change the course of my life. So I never imagined I'd go to university because I was thrown out of school. I failed school. I hated school because I couldn't get my head around this kind of left brain form of learning. And when I got into art and design, I was thrown out before the end of the year because I just thought, what am I doing here? I was miserable and ended up working in a factory. And in the factory, I ended up becoming a warehouse manager, and I was so unhappy because I knew that I was living the wrong life. This was not the life I was supposed to be living. And I wrote a whole play on scrap paper while I worked in that warehouse that went on to become a full-fledged production at Theatre Works for 3 weeks about this guy living the wrong life. And that was me. And it was difficult in the early days because I didn't have any creative friends. I was a jock. It's hard to believe, but I won a title, weightlifting title, state title, and I competed in Mr. Australia 3 times in drug-free bodybuilding. But with cancer, I lost 30 kilos. I lost all the muscle I had on my body. But that was a really interesting awakening because I defined myself a lot by my body, and all of a sudden it was taken away from me. So I had to define myself inside my own head with something else. My friends have been, instrumental in my life. My father became probably my greatest supporter in the end, but in the early days when I said, I'm leaving my job, I'm going to pursue acting, and I had no fucking acting friends, and I didn't know how to go about it, but I just knew I could not stay where I was. My father called me a loser and said, you'll amount to nothing, you're an idiot, you're a fool. And I knew I had to do what I was being told with my inner voice to do. So I did, but in the end, my father became my greatest supporter. And I remember the day he used to get out, he conveyed his emotion when he got drunk, because he was brought up in a different time where it wasn't easy to put your heart in your sleeve. When he was really drunk, he said, no, I was wrong. I had a life I didn't really want to live. I worked in jobs I didn't like. You did. You went out there and took a risk and followed your dreams. And I admire you for that. And that meant a lot to me at the time.
Many artists throughout their career really only take on one or two mediums in their style of work. What encouraged you or gave you the confidence to explore such a variety and take that risk and continue to take that risk to this day?
I guess primarily knowing that it doesn't really matter. Like, you could talk yourself out of anything. You can go, I'm not good enough to try this, I'm not good enough to do this. But especially since I've been fighting for my life for the last 8 years, even more so it's compounded the idea that it doesn't matter. Like, life is really short and you've got to just do what you move to do. Not so much what you think you want to do, but more so what you move to do on a deeper level. And I was always like, what can I do next? What can I try? I'm not worrying about what any audience was going to think. I mean, I don't know if any of you were aware of the opera that's playing in there at the moment. That was the last big performance production I was able to do, because not long after that I was diagnosed with leukemia, and then I had a bone marrow transplant, and with that I got a disease. That's why I have all these kind of marks on my legs. It's my new immune system rejecting my body, and that fuses my body up. And that was the end of my performance days. But the whole opera came from the idea of me crawling around the studio floor doing these giant heads. And I thought, how can this become a piece of theatre? And that's right up with the idea for the opera. So the script was just me scribbling giant drawings and arrows of where the dancers are going to move next. But I thought, there's got to be some way of getting this on, of manifesting this. And I've always found that if I write out a concept, an idea, draw up a script, write a script, even if I don't know how the hell I'm going to get the funding for it, how I'm going to get it on, I learned that it'll get on. The how has never been the issue. It should never be the question. That's what I've learned. If you worry about the how, it contaminates you and you'll never do anything. But not worrying about the how has been the way I've got so many projects up, so many things funded from nothing. Even when I did a project at Geelong Secondary College, I drew up this whole concept of this massive thing. And when the school approached me and said, we want you to do something that fuses sport with art, I said, I've already written the script, and there was an opportunity. I was given 500 students for 6 weeks full time to realize my concept. That kind of labor costs a lot of money. And that's happened to me many, many times over. Even that incarnation of the opera, that was like a $60,000 production. Once it started, it just kind of happened. There was 25 crew working on that, 7 makeup artists, 7 dancers. It was a massive production, but it got up, But at the time, if I just think about how I'm going to do it, never would have happened. How am I going to get $60,000 tomorrow to get this production up? But once I started moving towards realizing it, it just kind of took a life of itself and realizes itself. And you realize that you're not really doing it. It's just being done around you. Not just to serve me, it served many people involved in the whole process. That's the amazing thing about it.
You're an artist whose career has somewhat expanded beyond the gallery or the traditional gallery industry. You've attain success without the galleries, but also with the galleries. Which galleries and what did you learn about a successful gallery and how galleries can support an artist, but at the same time, you need to blossom and grow? I think you did what I mean.
No, can you repeat it?
Okay.
No. Galleries definitely earlier on were very important. It's a different time now. Then earlier on, galleries would take on an artist and support that artist for a time frame. You keep on exhibiting that, build up your audience, you get more people buying your work, and you'd have a relationship with the gallery, a close relationship, a real friendship. But I see going into being sick, having leukemia, and then one thing led to another. I spent 8 years in and out of hospital. I still did projects. The mural in Marabina, I don't know if anyone knows that mural. It's 40 meters long by 5 meters high. I did that to be a year and a half. Jason was by my side working on that. I did that on life support. I had 8% kidney function, but when I was offered a wall that size, it was like, well, I'm not going to say no. So, but I needed a purpose to keep me alive, and that was the purpose. There's always has to be a purpose for everyone, at every point in their life. Otherwise, what is there? And the galleries supported me for many years and were my friends and introduced me to a lot of clients I never got without them. So they were really important, but now it's different. The model has changed, Artists now, if they go to a commercial gallery, the commercial gallery seems to be more interested in how much money they can make off the artist. And I've seen artists make work to facilitate the gallery and the gallery's clients. And it's difficult because you kind of want to survive. You want to try and make some money. You want to try and sell your work. Years ago, I had a guy come to me. He was a major dealer and very egotistical. And he said to me, a big meeting, he sat in this huge armchair like a throne and said, okay, this is the deal. You make as much work as you can make. I'll buy it all off you. I'll put it in the secondary market. I'll buy it back at a certain price. I'll create a whole industry for you. All you have to do is keep providing me and I'll make you really wealthy. But you can't go and do projects like the Myers Windows where you're raising money for charity. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And I said to him at the end of the meeting, you know what? I'm tempted because you're offering me security as an artist, but I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't not do those projects because those projects are integral to who I am. I need to do those projects that connect to the public, that connect to marginalized groups, or to communities. Not that because I'm saying I'm a great person, but because what's the purpose of just making art for art's sake? It has to serve something, in my vision, and if it can serve raising money for other people or whatever, then all the better, So it became difficult to stand outside the system, but I survived outside the system without having to sell my soul to be in the system. Yeah.
Over the last 8 to 9 years, you've been through, some might say hell. It's pretty close to it. Mentally, physically, spiritually, you've been tested from all angles. How much has art helped you through that period?
A lot. I mean, when I was first put in for my bone marrow transplant, first of all, I got leukemia first, and I needed a bone marrow transplant to survive. And it's a brutal process having a bone marrow transplant. My family, my sister, friends helped bring in tables into the isolation room, and I started drawing because I wasn't really allowed to leave the room for quite a long time. And the nurses were coming to me looking like they were COVID nurses now. So I just drew stuff. And some of those pictures are in the Alfred Hospital now because they're donating all of the pictures to the Alfred Hospital. Because I saw, being in the cancer ward or walking around night after night in the dark, that there's nothing to look at. There's nothing to engage with, But drawing and making stuff definitely has got me through. It's given me some purpose, just to try and finish that or just develop this head over here or something to just distract me. And it's been, even now I have chronic pain all the time with my legs and my nerves are ratchet, but making stuff is a great distraction for me, and being obsessive about it is helpful because it's going down the rabbit hole and I'm gone. And then I just end up in this other world where I'm not making anything. I'm just in this zone and it's making itself. And it distracts me that I've got a physical body at all. It's just something else. So I become really unaware of my body, my pain, my physicality on all levels. It's like a metaphysical experience because I've never pre-sketched a drawing or a painting or worked it out before I start. Never. I just start. But then because I've made so much imagery over the years, you just become more attuned to being impulsive and just attacking it. And when I have artists come up to me, because standing in front of a blank canvas is a metaphor for life. It's intimidating. The longer you stand in front of it and do nothing, the more intimidating it gets. So the first thing you got to do is just put like a mark on it. As soon as you make the mark on it, you got to do with that mark and you're away.
Could you share one or two of your proudest moments of your career to date?
I could, but I'll probably cry again. I will. I cry very easily because I really have no boundaries anymore, no barriers. Because being through what I've been through on a physical level, it just takes them away, There's been lots of moments that I could say were incredibly moving for me, too many to actually put into words. I could think, I'll tell you two if you want to hear them, but I'll cry for sure. One of them I'll never forget, and I created this, I don't know if anyone's heard of a guy called Bill May. He invented walking with the dinosaurs. He became a father figure to me. He had this place in Kensington called Number 12. It was the biggest function centre, one of the biggest function centres in Australia. It was 3,000 square metres. You walk in the front golden doors and it's unicorns, and it was just incredible space full of indoor fountains and amazing. He had huge functions there. I can't remember how I met him, but he got me in and he saw me as the artist that he didn't become because he took a different path. He got into major corporate, giant and crazy functions. He used to bring horse and carriages into these spaces for events at the sort of level he worked at. And he'd written a play for Disney, and he looked like Andy Warhol. And he'd walk around. He was dyslexic. He'd walk around with these two assistants, go, okay, I want flowers here. I want this. I want that. And they'd just be writing down notes and being miles an hour. And I met him, and he took me under his wing, but he kind of didn't really tell me. And he brought this charity in. A big charity, and they wanted to do some mega function, and he got me into the meeting. I know, what am I doing in this meeting? And then he goes, okay, we got an idea for your function. Anthony's going to give you an idea right now. And I went, okay. So we're going to do. We're going to take over that 400 square metre room. I'm going to put real grass in it. We're going to truck it all in. We're going to lay all the grass. And then I'm going to create a magical world for all these kids with terminal illnesses. I'm going to bring in still walkers, performers, everything. I'm going to have all these games that don't have any ending. They're infinite games because I don't want these kids to see that it doesn't matter how long they'll live for. It's the quality of their life. And so it happened. We laid the grass. Semi-trailer came, and all labourers there and me, we broke our backs laying all this grass. But the grass could only survive for 3 days. I would die because of artificial lighting. And then we brought in all these performers, had 17 performers, all these games. It was immense, over the top. It was an incredible experience. One of the games I had was Magic Fire Building. So I had all these amazing costumes because the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was a huge production in Melbourne just finished that he produced. So I had access to all those costumes, as well as all the Australian ballet costumes. So I had one of my elf characters. They're all friends that I brought into work on it, all performers. As an elf, he ran Magic Fire Building. So I had this huge, like a teepee, structure. And we had about 60, 70 metres of rope light and coloured lighting. All these kids were wrapping the lining around this structure. This boy with severe MS, he was in his wheelchair, and he didn't have long to live. He crawled out of his wheelchair, he's on the ground, and he's wrapping the lights around this structure. So when they finished, I had this very renowned magician be part of the whole thing as well. He came in and got all the kids to say at once, from all around different games they were playing, to light the magic fire, a spell. This little boy was out of his wheelchair just staring at this structure he'd been part of. When they said the magic word 3 times, All the staff turned the lights on, and this thing just came to life. It was insane. Lights everywhere, and this boy's face. It's amazing. I was watching him the whole time. And I just burst into tears looking at his face. That moment, I could see the rapture in his face was just so intense, from that experience. Experience like that.
Would you like to talk us through the exhibition and how it all came together in the series? Because it really does encompass sections of your career in many ways.
All those big paintings in the first room, if you've seen them, and all the kangaroos and the horses and the sculptures, and most of that stuff, I do all of it in 10 months. It's hard to believe, but I work quickly, but also I'm very focused when I work. And I have a studio here, but I have a studio at home. So I draw intense. I go from here to home. I just don't stop. I just keep working until I'm exhausted and I go to bed. A lot of people think that took years to make, but it only took 10 months. It's kind of like a survey show, but it kind of isn't, because if I had to go back and pick pieces that I'd like to show now, I don't own them. I don't know where they are. There's hundreds and hundreds of pieces out there all over the place that I don't know who owns them or where they are. The ones in here are ones I kind of kept or put aside for some reason. They just didn't fit into something else, or they resonated with me in a certain way or something. So when this show came along, it goes back to a theatre thing. I really want to be a theatrical experience. I wanted people to walk from one room to another, have a different experience in every space. And I also wanted people to walk up to one piece and find that, in the history of everything is in that piece. There's so much detail in them that you can get lost in one piece for a long time. So I guess the show takes time to really go into every piece, because there's a story in every one that you will find. It's not the story I'm trying to convey to you. It's that you'll find your own thing in there. But I had some darker images that were a few years old that I wanted to put in there too, to break up the space. And I wanted, when you got to the last room, especially for kids, I wanted kids to see that just because it's art, it's not necessarily precious. We put tags under art being precious, but I wanted the kids to be able to play with the art, with the jigsaw puzzle, with the giant puzzle and stuff like that as well. So it's interactive, but I wanted the whole thing to be theatrical, and engage people theatrically. But I'm not really kind of into just hanging hollow paintings on the wall and just walk around and look at all the paintings. For me, because of my background and all the things that I've done, it had to be a theatrical experience. It had to be an emotive experience. I didn't really want people to stand in front of things and conceptualize about them. I wanted them to feel something, because when I make them all, I feel so much. I'm hoping that feeling can be conveyed through the imagery.
So do you have any future plans to, I guess, attract to or move forward in that same concept of two mediums?
I really miss being able to physically perform. There's so many performance pieces that were always about, because I was an athlete, I was a full-on athlete, and it was always about the artist as athlete. Anyone know Matthew Barney's work? Okay, he did a piece that really inspired me called The Drawing Restraint, where he put a rubber cable around himself, and he threw himself at the wall, and the cable would pull him back very aggressively and tried to make marks on the wall. And I loved that piece because I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to do art that's under duress, that's time limited. And so I've done so many projects. I've done one in the Myers windows that, I don't know if anyone's seen it, there's a documentary on YouTube about it, where I did 100 paintings in 7 days in the Myers windows, and we sold them directly out of the window. It was a social experiment. I thought, how can people can't communicate with me directly, but how can I communicate with them through a window? And it worked really well, because the first people come up to me and they were watching me, and they were very timid. But then by the end of it, we sold 97 of the paintings and raised $24,000 for that same organisation I did that installation for. And I've always liked to do stuff where there's a time limit, and the opera was the same. Doing that opera and making that painting in 50 minutes was extremely physically demanding. So I trained myself to be fit enough to be able to do it, because I wanted the audience to see the process of making it, but I wanted the audience to see that I was putting myself in a vulnerable state. When you're exhausted, you're really vulnerable and very emotional. you know. And when we ended up it was a very experimental production. It was very successful in the sense that we sold it out, had waiting lists for tickets and standing ovations, and the standing ovations were incredible because I would just burst into tears, of course, because all these people just go up to this rapture of appreciation for what you gifted them with. But what you've really gifted them with is an experience where you've laid yourself on the line, that you've made yourself super vulnerable. And people pick up on that aspect if they don't really understand it. It's the vulnerability that communicates. If you want to make yourself vulnerable, you can't really affect other people. You can't expect them to be vulnerable if you're not vulnerable. It has to be an equal exchange. That makes sense. I never really answered that question properly. I'm hoping to do public sculptures is the next thing I really want to do as well. And I'm hoping to do another theatrical performance where I won't be performing, but something that's multimedia, projection, and again, an emotive experience. But, you know, physically I might not be able to, but it's an aspiration that I'm wanting to do, pushing towards. I'm also finishing my third book at the moment, and I'm just starting the fourth one. They're both very different books. One's kind of like a memoir. I've been working for 3 years. It's a collection of stories. It's called The Spirit Endures Once the Body Cannot. And the other book is another art book again. So I'm hoping to get those two books on the table at some point.
When's the first time you drew a frog?
First frog. You know, I never planned to make frogs. The Melbourne Zoo contacted me and said, we have this big frog day event. Would you do something for it? So, of course, I said yes. And I thought, I've never really painted a frog before. So I started painting a frog as I would paint it. I thought, okay, I'm just going to do it the way I would do it. So I started to drip the outline of the frog. I started to fill the frog in, and I created these 8 big frog paintings for Frog Day. I owned the paintings. The zoo paid me to do it I put them on easels, this big market at this big event. Then they gave them all back to me. And I thought, what am I going to do with these paintings? I took them to the Sydney Art Fair, thinking I'm not going to show them. And they were in the back room. And I went in there to get something else. And my Sydney dealer was there, and he wasn't showing me about fair. Queensland dealer was, and said, those frog paintings are awesome. What are you going to do with those? I said, I'm not going to show them. I can't imagine what people want to buy a frog painting. And he goes, look, give them to me. I'll take them. I'll sell them. So he took 3 of them, and he sold 3 of them from his booth at the Sydney Art Fair. And that was the beginning of the frog. The frog's changed a lot over the years now. It's become more psychedelic and more tripped out from the early incarnations, as I've become that way. But now I would have made hundreds of frogs and bugs characters, and I kind of had a shame about them because they came kind of easy to me in a way, and I kind of like always had this mental enough to fight for everything. And this show was kind of like the first time I've really, and somebody made a comment to me a while back, and I thought, you know what, you're right. I need to celebrate them because they're dear friends to me. They have been for a long time, best characters. So in this show, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do frog cutouts out of timber. I'm going to do standing bud sculptures. I'm going to just take them to the next level instead of depriving them of natural light.
Why do some of your characters have animal features?
It's not a conceptual, like a thinking thing where I think, most of my characters I feel are androgynous. They're not really meant to be males or females. But because I'm a male, people probably think they're more masculine. Maybe they are, I don't know. But even with the frogs, I started to keep the bugs' eyelashes and stuff to make some of them more feminine and compared to other ones. But I'm certainly a conscious thing when I think about combining animals with humans. I've done a couple of paintings of horses, like a stem neck coming out of them, and then a head riding them. And the first one I did, what I called the Spirit Endures Once the Body Cannot, because I see the horse as, and this has been something in history of art too, the horse represents the human spirit. And with the Blue Rider movement, Kandinsky and those guys, the blue horse was the spirit because it was blue. So a lot of the horses in this show have blue faces or blue in them to represent the spirit. And the rider is attached to the horse. he's not riding the horse, he's attached to the horse. So the horse kind of represents symbolically his spirit of the rider, of the human. So it's melding them together as one, because I believe, we're all are a spiritual essence having an earthly life. I've certainly learned that firsthand many times in my life, that's the way it is. And the horse kind of symbolizes it for me. And that's why a lot of the characters have 3 eyes or 4 eyes or whatever, because one eye is kind of like, without me over-conceptualizing, it's the eye of the spirit, which is seeing as well. As our human eyes take in reality, so do our spiritual bodies all the time. So the animal and the human, I guess, there's a crossover there, because we're all spiritual creatures. The kangaroos, I did them very recently. I wanted to make a pro-treaty statement. I think it's terrible that we haven't ever had a proper treaty with the indigenous people of this land. And I've been up to the communities, I've worked with the children, I've seen a lot up there, been up there 3 times, even when I was sick enough to Uluru, work with the kids up there, work with Aboriginal painters at the Cultural Centre. And I just thought, we should have a treaty with these people. The treatment of them in history has been savage. But the kangaroos, when I got to the eyes, I thought, sure, I could emulate a kangaroo's eye, but that doesn't seem right. So I put my version of human eyes into the kangaroos and the horses, because I thought I can convey their vulnerability better if I do that. I didn't want to put eyes in them that conveyed an unreachable essence. So that's why the kangaroos they're kangaroos without human eyes, because they're part of us and we're part of them. That's how I see it.
Is it hard to take a break?
Yes, in a way. When me, Rebecca, and a couple of other close friends of ours would been away a lot together on little trips, and we always sit around a table and draw together. We're still working, but we're socialising and working at the same time. But I socialise a lot. I need stimulation that's external, so I'm very into that. I'm very into going to theatre shows, other people's exhibitions, and connecting to all that's really important. So I don't just sit isolated, because I can't do that either. But I don't watch television. I'm not really into Netflix. My take on it all is it's really fundamentally an addiction and a waste of time for me. I'm not saying everyone else should not watch Netflix or television, but I don't see it as a good time spent for me. I'd rather listen to music and create something, because every time I create something, I'm connecting myself to a deeper realm of infinite incredibleness, Oh yeah, I say, well, I do. But when I wake up in the morning, I go back to transcribing my book but I still take time out for sure. I need to. I live on the beach, and I spend, lately, especially after the show, I was exhausted, and I sit on the beach pretty much every afternoon I have been. Because I got sick after the show too, because my immune system is very compromised. And just stare at the ocean, stare at the horizon. I'd much rather do that than watch television or a screen, for sure. And that's where I get a rejuvenation. Walk along the beach on my own. I find that really soul-fulfilling, so I do that as much as possible. If I'm watching television or Netflix all the time, I watch an occasional movie. Then I just feel like, what am I doing this? Why am I watching this shit, Because reality to me is what's in front of me, I can't change the world. I'd love to. But I say to people, it's too hard and overwhelming to change the world. But I can make a difference in someone's life now. I can smile at the next person. So when I go walking on the beach or walking anywhere, I'm always talking to people, engaging with people all the time. Because fundamentally I can make a difference. That creates a ripple effect. So that's an awareness I have all the time, is how can I make a difference in this hour, in this minute, in this day? I take every opportunity to do that.
How do you define success as an artist, and do you feel that you yourself are successful?
I don't define success on a superficial level. It doesn't matter how much money you make that isn't successful, because success is an inner thing. I judge my successes by inner pendulum, you know. If my work speaks to someone on a deep level and I see really affects them on some level, then that's success. If I can do a project that serves some group or marginalized group, that's successful, you know. And I can make a piece that I really love because I've taken a risk and it's taken me to a new area, because I think risk is fundamentally the most important thing always with creative practice. You don't take risk, then, because fear can get in the way and you kind of go, I want to get this right. I want to get it better than the last one I did over there. But that kind of thinking, I find for myself, just contorts me. That limits me. I need to do something which I call the violation. The violation is if I'm doing a piece and it's not really working and I've realized that I'm not listening to the painting anymore, my head's in the way, then I'll violate the painting. Violation means I might throw paint at it, might do something to potentially wreck it, because as soon as I do that, I've taken it in a new direction if I try and resolve it. I'm trying to resolve something I didn't expect to resolve, and I'm in a different stratosphere, you know. And I've always had that kind of concept going through me all the time. And I guess your question before about doing a broad range of stuff comes from always trying to take a risk. Okay, I've done this. Remember you saying to me, actually, why don't you go back and do those drawings that you did 30 years ago because you really like them? And I can't do them because I'm in a different headspace now. I can only do what I'm doing now. So those big paintings are where I'm at now. But then tomorrow, I want to do something like that again. I'll do something different again, because you have to, I think. I have to, because otherwise I'm just dead, you know, if I don't keep taking a risk and moving forward and doing something different all the time. And there's been lots of times I thought this risk is going to be a massive failure, like the opera. But I had to take it because I had to know, you know, and a massive failure is a massive public failure because you're putting it in front of lots of people, 10 shows, you know, in a theatre. But it's like, well, at the end of the day, what does it really matter? Because fundamentally, I'm only doing it for my own expansion spiritually. That's the bottom line. So if I don't take a risk to expand my spirit, then what does it matter what my earthly mind thinks? Because all of our earthly minds want comfort, want life to be easy. But we're not here to have an easy life, you know. We're here to learn, as far as I'm concerned. And you learn through suffering, you learn through difficulty, you learn through challenge, you learn through overcoming things. When I first got diagnosed with cancer, I didn't think, poor me. I spent so much time in the hospital. I could tell a million stories about people who were suffering this intense, including someone I just met a couple of days ago. It's full on, you know, but it's experience. But we judge experience. We say, that experience is better than this experience. But I learned that having cancer is an incredible experience for my consciousness to experience having cancer. It's an incredible experience to be knowing that I could die in a minute. You know, that's an incredible experience to have. So I don't think it's a bad experience. It's just an experience. But I can label it and say it's a bad experience, or I can label it and say it's a good experience. The labeling limits the potential of the experience always. And that's kind of how I've learned to live, you know.
Looking forward, do you have set goals of creative achievements that you intend to aim at, or is it an open slather, or do you take it day by day?
Oh, well, it's day by day, but I mean, I have projects. I have a school project to do with kids that's been going to go forward, you know, and I'm always putting the feelers out there for something here, something over there, you know, I'm going to get the book done, blah, blah, blah. It's never ending process because I don't ever sit down going, I don't know what to do, or I can't think of anything. I don't need a reference. I don't need to look at a tree and then draw a tree. I just never have worked that way. My imagination is just like overwhelmed with things to do. And the more I give myself over to that process, the more things come in. It just becomes like a bit overwhelming because the idea is one thing, but the backup. There are lots of artists who start paintings and I call it the inspiration phase. They get the inspiration on the canvas and then they stop and they move on to the next painting, you know, but the follow through is the most crucial part because the follow through is the discipline. The discipline's so important. You've got to do the work. I mean, in that show, there's so many pieces that took hours and hours and hours of focus, and many times I'm losing my mind, going, oh my God. But I've got to get to the end of this painting. I've got to finish it. You know, I've got to find the conclusion in here somewhere. I've got to stay with it. I've got to wrestle with it till I get to the last dot, you know.
Would you like to say that once? Anything more?
Thanks for listening to my ramble. I hope everyone's awake. And I'll come into the gallery for a while if you want to talk about anything in there in particular. Thank you so much, and thanks to JD for the opportunity to do such a big show here. Thanks for coming, and thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.